The silence in the Manhattan boardroom was suffocating. 47 floors above the bustling streets of New York City, in the mahogany-paneled conference room of Morrison and Associates, two people sat across from each other at a table that had witnessed the destruction of countless careers. The air conditioning hummed ominously overhead, but nothing could cool the tension that was about to explode into the most devastating corporate takedown in American legal history. Judy Martinez, a 34-year-old former compliance officer from Brownsville, Texas, sat rigidly in her modest navy blazer from JCPenney, her calloused hands gripping a worn manila folder like it contained the secrets of the universe. Her dark eyes, framed by wire-rimmed glasses she had bought at a drugstore, burned with the kind of quiet determination that comes from watching children die while powerful men count their money. Across from her, Richard Morrison III adjusted, his 18-karat gold cufflinks with the casual arrogance of a man who had never lost a single battle in 47 years of corporate warfare. Morrison, 52 years old and worth more than the entire annual budget of Judy's hometown, straightened his $3,000 Armani tie and smiled the cold smile of a predator who had cornered his prey. His Harvard law diploma hung behind him, like a trophy, one of 3 generations of Morrison men who had built their fortune on burying the truth so deep that it would never see daylight. His piercing blue eyes had stared down senators, intimidated federal judges, and made Fortune 500 CEOs weep with gratitude for his protection. What happened in the next 60 seconds would send shockwaves through every corporate boardroom in America and prove that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one everyone underestimates. "Miss Martinez," Morrison began, his voice carrying the icy authority that had made grown men abandon their principles and walk away from justice. "I think it's time you understood something very important about how the real world works." He leaned forward, his manicured fingers steepled like a cathedral of corruption. "Little people like you don't challenge institutions like ours. Perhaps you should pack up your pathetic little life and crawl back to whatever backwater town spawned you, before this gets very, very ugly for you and everyone you pretend to care about." The words sliced through the air like a legal scalpel, designed to cut away hope and replace it with fear. In any other circumstance, with any other person, this would have been the moment of surrender. Morrison had delivered this speech hundreds of times before, watching small-town whistleblowers crumble under the weight of his threats and slink away into obscurity, while his clients continued poisoning communities and destroying lives. But Morrison had made the fatal mistake of his entire career. He had no idea who he was really dealing with. He didn't know that Judy Martinez had spent the last 8 months becoming an expert in federal racketeering laws. He didn't know that every word he was speaking was being recorded by devices so sophisticated that the FBI had personally helped her plant them. He didn't know that the scared little compliance officer sitting across from him had already gathered enough evidence to bring down not just his client, but his entire law firm, his personal fortune, and 47 years of what the Department of Justice would later call the most systematic corporate cover-up in American history. Most importantly, Morrison had no idea that Judy Martinez wasn't just fighting for justice. She was fighting for the memory of 7-year-old Isabella Santos, who had died of a rare blood cancer caused by the toxic chemicals that Morrison's client had been illegally dumping into groundwater for over a decade. Isabella's mother had begged Judy to keep fighting even after the first wave of death threats, even after the private investigators started following her, even after Morrison's people tried to have her arrested on fabricated charges. What Morrison was about to hear would destroy everything he had built and expose a truth so horrifying that it would force Congress to rewrite corporate crime laws. Judy's response didn't just end his career. It revealed a criminal conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of corporate America and proved that sometimes the most powerful weapon against corruption isn't money, or connections, or Harvard degrees. Sometimes it's just one person who refuses to let children die in silence, while rich men profit from their suffering. Before we dive into this incredible story of how a small-town compliance officer brought down one of the most powerful law firms in America, hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss any of the explosive corporate corruption cases we expose. Trust me, when you hear what Judy Martinez did next, you'll understand why this became the most talked-about takedown in corporate legal history. This isn't just another David versus Goliath story. This is the moment when decades of systematic corruption collided with one woman's unbreakable moral courage. And the results changed everything. This wasn't just another corporate intimidation meeting in a Manhattan boardroom. This was the final battle in a war that had been raging in the shadows of American corporate power for over a decade. A war where the weapons were buried environmental reports, falsified safety data, and the systematic murder of innocent families through toxic chemicals. What Morrison didn't realize as he sat there smugly adjusting his gold cufflinks was that he was staring at the woman who was about to expose the largest environmental cover-up in United States history, a conspiracy so vast and so deadly that it would make the Iran scandal look like a parking ticket. The stakes couldn't have been higher, and they stretched far beyond the mahogany-paneled walls of Morrison and Associates. At that very moment, in 3 different communities across Texas, Louisiana, and Ohio, children were dying from cancer so rare that most doctors had never seen them before. Isabella Santos had been just the beginning. 7-year-old Marcus Thompson in Louisiana had lost his battle with leukemia 6 months earlier. 9-year-old Emily Chen in Ohio was currently in her 3rd round of chemotherapy, her tiny body ravaged by tumors that shouldn't exist in someone her age. 12-year-old David Rodriguez had died just 2 weeks ago, and his funeral had been attended by 47 other families whose children were fighting the same mysterious cancers. What connected all these children wasn't genetics or bad luck, it was ChemCorp Industries, Morrison's most lucrative client, and their systematic dumping of industrial waste into groundwater systems that supplied drinking water to over 800,000 Americans. For 15 years, ChemCorp had been disposing of their most toxic manufacturing byproducts by injecting them directly into underground aquifers, knowing full well that these chemicals would eventually reach residential water supplies. They had the Environmental Protection Agency reports proving it, they had their own internal studies confirming it, and they had Richard Morrison III making sure that information never saw the light of day. Morrison and Associates wasn't just a law firm. It was the legal fortress that protected 73 of the Fortune 500 companies from ever facing consequences for their crimes. For 47 years, 3 generations of Morrison men had perfected the art of legal intimidation, turning the American justice system into a weapon that protected the guilty and silenced the innocent. They had a 100% success rate in making corporate whistleblowers disappear, not through violence, but through something far more effective: complete financial and social destruction. Their methods were legendary in corporate circles. First came the friendly phone calls, subtle suggestions that perhaps the whistleblower had misunderstood what they had seen. When that failed, private investigators would materialize from nowhere, following the target to work, to school pickups, to grocery stores, making sure they knew they were being watched. Next came the anonymous letters, the mysterious phone calls in the middle of the night, the sudden audits from tax authorities, the unexpected visits from Child Protective Services. By the time Morrison and Associates was finished with someone, they had lost their job, their savings, their reputation, and often their family. The firm's client list read like a who's who of corporate America's biggest polluters, largest tax evaders, and most dangerous manufacturers. They had protected pharmaceutical companies that knew their drugs caused birth defects. They had shielded oil companies that covered up massive spills in pristine wilderness areas. They had defended chemical manufacturers that continued selling products they knew caused cancer. And they had done it all with a legal sophistication that made their actions technically legal, even when they were morally monstrous. Richard Morrison III had inherited this empire of legal corruption from his father, who had built it on the foundation laid by his grandfather. The Morrison family had turned corporate defense into a multi-billion-dollar industry, and Richard had taken it to levels of efficiency and ruthlessness that would have impressed Machiavelli himself. His personal net worth exceeded $200 million, all earned by ensuring that corporate crimes never faced justice. But Morrison had never encountered anyone like Judy Martinez, and he had no idea that she represented something his family's law firm had never faced before. Someone with absolutely nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. Judy wasn't motivated by money or career advancement or political ambition. She was motivated by the faces of dead children and the desperate pleas of mothers who wanted justice for their babies. 8 months earlier, when Judy had first discovered the falsified environmental reports in ChemCorp's files, she had naively believed that the system would work. She had reported her findings to her supervisor, expecting an immediate investigation and swift action to protect the affected communities. Instead, she had been told to focus on her own responsibilities and stop looking for problems that didn't exist. When she persisted, she had been transferred to a different department. When she continued asking questions, she had been placed on probationary status for creating a hostile work environment. That's when Judy realized that the corruption went far deeper than she had imagined. ChemCorp wasn't just hiding their crimes from the government. They were hiding them with the government's help. Environmental Protection Agency officials were receiving consulting contracts from ChemCorp after leaving public service. State environmental commissioners were being offered lucrative board positions. Federal prosecutors were being convinced that pursuing environmental cases was a waste of taxpayer resources. The web of corruption was so vast and so well funded that it seemed impenetrable. ChemCorp had spent over $40 million in the past 5 years alone on legal fees, lobbying, and what they euphemistically called community relations. They had funded studies at prestigious universities that proved their chemicals were safe. They had sponsored medical research that found no connection between their products and childhood cancers. They had even donated millions to children's hospitals, creating a public relations shield that made any criticism seem ungrateful and mean-spirited. But Morrison's greatest mistake was underestimating the power of a mother's love and a compliance officer's attention to detail. While he had been busy building legal barriers and intimidating witnesses, Judy had been quietly building something far more dangerous, an unshakable foundation of evidence that would bring down not just ChemCorp, but everyone who had helped them cover up their crimes. By the time she walked into that boardroom, Judy Martinez had transformed herself from a small-town compliance officer into something that corporate America had never seen before, a whistleblower who couldn't be bought, threatened, or destroyed. She had spent 8 months learning federal racketeering laws, studying successful prosecutions of corporate conspiracies, and building relationships with federal agents who specialized in environmental crimes. She had documented every threat, recorded every intimidation attempt, and photographed every piece of evidence that proved the conspiracy reached into the highest levels of corporate and government power. Morrison thought he was meeting with a scared little girl from Texas who could be bullied into silence. He was actually sitting across from the woman who was about to expose a criminal enterprise that had been poisoning American children for over a decade, and her evidence was so comprehensive and so damning that it would result in the largest corporate criminal penalties in American history. The war was about to end, and Morrison had no idea that he had already lost. To understand how this epic confrontation reached its explosive climax, you need to know who these two people really were and why their collision was inevitable. On one side sat the embodiment of American corporate power, and on the other, the most unlikely hero in the history of corporate justice. Judy Martinez had grown up in a trailer park in Brownsville, Texas, where her father worked double shifts at a chemical plant and her mother cleaned office buildings at night to pay for her daughter's college textbooks. Judy was the first person in her family to graduate high school, let alone earn a business degree from the University of Texas. She had started at ChemCorp Industries as a junior compliance officer for $34,000 a year, believing that corporations followed the law and that her job was to help them do it better. Richard Morrison III had been born into legal royalty, inheriting a Manhattan law firm that his grandfather had founded in 1923. He had attended the same prep school as 3 Supreme Court justices, graduated summa cum laude from Harvard Law, and been handed a client list worth $4 billion in corporate accounts before his 30th birthday. Morrison owned a $12 million penthouse overlooking Central Park, a private island in the Bahamas, and a collection of vintage wines worth more than most people's homes. The contrast was staggering. Judy's annual salary barely covered Morrison's monthly wine budget. She drove a 12-year-old Honda Civic with 200,000 miles on it, while Morrison's personal driver transported him in a custom Bentley worth more than Judy's lifetime earnings. But the most important difference wasn't money. It was what they were willing to do for it. Morrison had built his fortune by silencing people who tried to save lives. Judy was about to destroy everything he had built because she refused to let children die in silence. Morrison's war against Judy Martinez began with surgical precision, following a playbook that had destroyed 127 careers without a single failure. It started with polite phone calls from ChemCorp's Human Resources Department, suggesting that perhaps Judy had misunderstood the environmental reports she had been reviewing. When she refused to back down, the calls became less polite and more frequent, often coming at 2 in the morning with recorded messages about her employment status being under review. Within a week, Judy noticed the black SUVs. They appeared everywhere she went, parked across from her apartment building when she left for work, following her to the grocery store, sitting in the parking lot during her lunch breaks. The message was clear. We are watching you, and we can reach you anywhere. When Judy called the police, they took a report, but explained that sitting in a public parking lot wasn't illegal, even if it felt threatening. Morrison's psychological warfare escalated quickly. Anonymous letters began arriving at Judy's apartment, typed on plain paper with no return address, containing detailed information about her daily routines, her favorite coffee shop, the route she took to visit her elderly parents. One letter included a photograph of her walking to her car, taken with a telephoto lens from across the street. Another contained a printout of her mortgage application with the words, "Your financial future depends on making smart choices," written in red ink across the top. The intimidation campaign reached a new level when Judy's supervisor at ChemCorp called her into his office and explained that the company was concerned about her mental stability and emotional fitness for her position. He suggested she take unpaid medical leave to address what he called her obvious paranoia and conspiracy thinking. When Judy refused, she was transferred to a windowless basement office where her new job involved filing safety reports that never seemed to go anywhere. But Morrison had made a critical miscalculation. Every threatening phone call, every intimidating letter, every illegal surveillance tactic was being carefully documented by someone who understood that evidence was more powerful than fear. Judy had been recording every conversation since the intimidation began, photographing every suspicious vehicle, and maintaining a detailed log of every attempt to silence her. The private investigators Morrison had hired to destroy Judy's life had no idea they were actually providing evidence for her federal case. Every illegal tactic they used, every law they broke while trying to intimidate her into silence, was being captured and cataloged by a woman who had spent months learning how to build an unshakable federal prosecution. Morrison thought he was breaking her down. He was actually giving her everything she needed to bring him down. The moment of reckoning arrived when Morrison finished his contemptuous threat and leaned back in his leather chair, expecting Judy to crumble like all the others before her. Instead, something extraordinary happened. Judy Martinez smiled. It wasn't a nervous smile or a defeated smile. It was the calm, confident smile of someone who held all the cards and was about to play them. "Mr. Morrison," she said quietly, reaching into her worn briefcase, "before you threaten me any further, there's something you should know." She placed a small digital recording device on the mahogany table between them. "Every word you just said was recorded and transmitted in real time to FBI Special Agent Sarah Chen, who is currently parked in the lobby of this building with a federal warrant for your arrest." Morrison's face went ashen. His associates began frantically whispering, but Judy wasn't finished. She pulled out a thick manila folder and opened it with deliberate precision. "For the past 8 months, while you were busy trying to intimidate me, I was busy learning federal racketeering laws. Did you know that threatening a federal witness is a felony that carries a mandatory minimum sentence of 5 years? The room fell silent as Judy continued. "You also should know that Isabella, Santos's mother, didn't just ask me to seek justice for her daughter. She asked me to make sure no other child would die the way Isabella did. So I made her a promise, Mr. Morrison. I promised her that everyone responsible for her daughter's death would face justice, including the lawyers who helped cover it up." Morrison tried to interrupt, but Judy's voice cut through his objections like a blade. "The FBI has been investigating ChemCorp for 6 months, and you've been under federal surveillance for 3. Every threat you made, every law you broke, every witness you intimidated has been documented and recorded. You're not just going to lose your law license, Mr. Morrison. You're going to federal prison." If you're shocked by Judy's incredible preparation and courage, smash that like button and share this video. This is exactly the kind of justice we need to see more of. Let us know in the comments if you think Morrison saw this coming. Within hours, the FBI arrested Morrison in front of his country club's most prestigious members. His penthouse was seized, his island confiscated, and his entire family fortune frozen as evidence. Morrison and Associates, the firm that had never lost a case in 47 years, was forced to close permanently within 6 months. ChemCorp faced $2 billion in criminal penalties and compensated 800 families affected by their toxic dumping. Morrison himself received 25 years in federal prison for racketeering and witness intimidation. Judy became a national hero, receiving the FBI's Citizen Service Award and a $3 million whistleblower reward. Most importantly, new federal legislation was passed requiring mandatory reporting of environmental crimes, ensuring that no future corporate cover-up could reach the scale of ChemCorp's poisoning campaign. Judy Martinez proved that in America, truth and courage can still triumph over unlimited money and corporate power. She didn't just expose corruption, she methodically built an unshakable case that brought down an entire criminal enterprise. Her victory sent a clear message to corporate America. The days of silencing whistleblowers through intimidation are over today. Judy runs the Isabella Santos Foundation, helping other corporate whistleblowers expose dangerous cover-ups safely. She has assisted in 43 successful prosecutions, saving countless lives and forcing corporations to follow environmental laws. Morrison's downfall became a cautionary tale taught in law schools nationwide about the consequences of choosing profit over human life. His empty penthouse serves as a reminder that no amount of wealth can protect criminals when brave individuals refuse to stay silent. The lesson was clear. Your power isn't determined by how much money you have or how many threats you can make. It's determined by how much truth you're willing to tell and how much courage you're willing to show. Sometimes it takes a small-town compliance officer to remind the most powerful people in America what justice really means. If Judy's incredible story of courage and justice inspired you like it inspired millions of Americans, smash that subscribe button and share this video with everyone you know. This is exactly the kind of corporate accountability we need more of. Let us know in the comments what you thought of Judy's brilliant strategy. And don't forget to check out our other videos about real heroes fighting corporate corruption.